Good Lord. I mean, that's pretty much all I can say about the matchup between George St. Pierre and Michael Bisping. There's a lot to break down on this. Personally, I think this might be the worst match that's been made by the new ownership group, WME IMG. Tim Boach versus Jacare was one that was looked at as pretty bad, but that was one where it was more you're just trying to keep Jacare busy, so you can understand it. Boach has pulled off some upsets before in the past. Obviously, Yushin Okami was highly ranked at the time he was taken out, but man, this GSP versus Michael Bisping fight, there were so many things that I don't like about it, and I'm going to start to go in depth on it. Before I rip this apart, I want to try to give WME a fair look at this as far as understanding why they would do what they did. So, just a little bit of background. GSP had been in negotiations for quite a while, and he just wasn't accepting any of the deals they were offering, whether he didn't want the money, he didn't like the opportunities. So if we're going to imagine why they would okay this fight, why they would sign this fight, I think there's a very real chance that GSP may have given up some money in order to get this fight. That he was saying, hey, look, I'll go a little bit lower, but you got to give me a title fight, and I want to fight Michael Bisping. That's about it. That's about as positive as we can be on this. That's about as fair as we can be to WMEIMG, but man, this fight doesn't make sense. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense short term. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense long term. If you're looking for a big fight short term, and George St. Pierre is saying, okay, I'm willing to go up to middleweight, that fight would be Anderson Silva. Michael Bisping is going to sell all right. Michael Bisping hasn't been a huge draw in the past. His fight with Dan Henderson that he headlined wasn't a huge pay-per-view draw. If you're looking just to make a big short-term fight with GSP, you've got to look at a guy like Anderson Silva. You could possibly even go with Johnny Hendricks. You could say, hey, he's back after all these years. Hendricks hasn't looked great lately. Obviously, GSP is going to be in a tough spot because not only has he been out a while, but he's also had to deal with some injuries. He's had his ACL blown out. For him to go right back into a title fight is going to be tough. And on top of that, that kind of brings us even further. So what's the long-term play on this? With Michael Bisping, it sounds like he's in a position where he's going to keep defending his title, but once he loses that title, his career is going to be over fairly shortly after. He's done a lot in his career. He's fought for a while. Obviously, he's reached the top. There's not a whole lot left for him to do, and obviously he's got the TV shows that he's working on now. He's got his radio show. He has outs, and chances are once he's done, he's done. George St. Pierre, it's not entirely clear what he's planning on doing long term. Does he want to maybe just grab another belt and then be done and say, hey, I was a two-weight world champion too? Is he looking to fight for another 5 years? It's not really clear what he wants, but let's just start going through scenarios. So scenario one is this fight happens and Michael Bisping beats George St. Pierre. Well, all you've really done is delay the middleweight division. You're going to have a guy like Yoel Romero coming up next. You might get Jacare. I'm not entirely sure what they're going to do with Yoel and Jacare in the meantime. Maybe they give them a rematch and the winner of that gets the next title shot. Again, if Gegard Mousasi beats Chris Weidman, it's going to be tough to deny him a title shot. There's a lot of actual contenders at middleweight right now that should be fighting for the title that aren't. But again, if Michael Bisping wins, then what do you do with George St. Pierre? Is that his warm-up fight and then you drop him back down to 170? If you're dropping him back down to 170, are you putting him up against a top contender? Are you putting him up against a guy who's maybe outside the top 10? If you're putting him against a guy who's outside the top 10 just to kind of warm him up, why aren't you just doing that now? And again, if Michael Bisping beats GSP and there's a lot of eyes on this fight, well, maybe that helps Michael Bisping start. But again, he's not going to be around a whole lot longer. He's in his late 30s. There's a good chance he could be retiring within a couple of fights. He's not the guy you build up right now. If you're going to feed a star to someone else, you're going to feed him to someone who's going to be here a while. And again, that sort of like what happened with the BJ Penn versus Yair Rodriguez fight. It was a brutal fight to watch, but it's big for Yair to get that win over BJ. At least BJ was getting put out by a guy who's a rising star. If GSP is going to come back and not look good in the process, Michael Bisping is not the guy you want to take the rub from. Okay, you don't want Michael Bisping to be the guy. You want a guy like Luke Rockhold. Maybe you give it to Chris Weidman. Again, Jacare, he's a little bit up there, but it looks like he's still got a few more years left in him. He's a guy you can look at, but Michael Bisping is not the guy. Now, if GSP wins, this would be even worse. So if George St. Pierre beats Michael Bisping, again, you're probably looking at the end of Michael Bisping. He's probably not going to take too many more fights. His career is going to be winding down. But then what do you do next? You have a guy who didn't want to go up to 185 for his entire career at 170 prior to the first retirement, who's now going to be fighting a monster like Yoel Romero. Like, he was getting annoyed with how strong the guys were at 170, whether that was natural or not, when he was fighting Johnny Hendricks. You're fighting a guy in Yoel Romero who had a false positive, so to speak. It was a positive, but it was a tainted supplement, as they found it to be. Whether or not he's done anything in the past, I mean, I would imagine so, but there's no proof of that. I can't actually make that claim, but come on. So that'd probably be the next fight for him. So he'd be fighting a much bigger wrestler. If you thought he had trouble taking Johnny Hendricks down, I don't really see how he's going to be able to implement his wrestling against Yoel. Yoel is vicious on the feet. He's not the most technical guy, but he's got a lot of great shots. Obviously, he's got his knees that he's timing really well, hits very hard. That's a brutal fight for GSP. Luke Rockhold, again, has great length. He's probably going to outstrike GSP if he gets the fight to the mat. Luke's a very, very good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. That could be a tough fight for him. It's just, I don't see a long-term play for George St. Pierre at middleweight as a middleweight champion. If he's going to resume his career and he's going to be competitive, it's going to be at 170. He's even talked about fighting Conor McGregor, saying he can make 155. If you can make 155, you should not be theing someone like Yoel Romero. You shouldn't be fighting Luke Rockhold. Really shouldn't be fighting Jacare Souza. So for them to make this fight, there's no long-term play in it. What are you building towards? If you've got a big name in George St. Pierre, that's great, but you're either going to use him and kind of help build him up and put him in a position where he can keep winning so he can become an even bigger star than he already is, or you're going to use him to make another big star. And I don't see how this matchmaking can make him a bigger star. And ultimately, that's your problem if you're WME. You bought this company for $4.2 billion. Yes, you're in debt. Yes, you're looking to make big fights. But again, if you're looking to make a big fight in the meantime, you can always do the GSP versus Anderson Silva fight. If GSP loses that fight, it's not the worst thing for him. If Anderson Silva loses that fight, then again, that's a big win for GSP. And then from there, he's back. He's shown that he's back. That's a huge win for him. You're going to build him up a lot. And now you can put him in at welterweight and find some matchups that he might have a good chance with. You look at Damian Maia, that's a tough fight for GSP. I don't know that that's one that you'd put him up against. But Damian Maia's going to be fighting Jorge Masvidal. Masvidal is a guy who's been doing very well lately. He's a guy who GSP could go up against. In theory, it's a guy he can beat. He should be able to take him down. He should be able to control, stay out of submissions, and win a 3-round fight there. That's the kind of fight you should be putting GSP in right now, not against Michael Bisping for a middleweight title. If they were doing this Michael Bisping fight and the title wasn't involved, let's just say Bisping had just lost the title to Henderson and they were just doing this as a one-off. Okay, fine. Again, that's not the best matchup, but it's a non-title fight. It's a fight to get him back into it, and that's all right. But for the title, this doesn't make sense. It really, really hurts the middleweight division, and it's not helping anybody's career. If again, GSP, maybe he can be a big star for a couple more years, but if you're WME, you need to be building new stars. You just lost Ronda Rousey. You have Conor McGregor, who's looking to go into boxing right now. He's asking for equity. Even if he's bringing in huge amounts of money, he's very well aware of what he's bringing in, and he's not going to let you profit way too much off of it. So you need to find guys who you can build up you're going to be able to make a good profit off of in the meantime, so you can pay your debt, so you can actually have a good profitable company here, and so your acquisition's actually worth it. And when you have a guy like GSP, especially now when he hasn't fought in so long, if you're going to bring him back and put him in a tough situation, you need to be doing it against a guy who has the potential to grow off it and use it to become a bigger star. Whether that's Tyron Woodley, whether you're looking at another up-and-comer in the division, maybe you give him to Wonder Boy and you give Damian Maia the title fight. Hell, you could even just wait until the Woodley versus Wonder Boy rematch is over, see who wins that, and then say, okay, well, we'll either give him to the loser and say if he beats the loser of that fight, then we give him a title fight. Or you just give him to the winner and say, okay, fine, you want your title fight, you're back, you're going to fight at welterweight, which is the weight class you were in. That actually makes sense. You could at least say, hey, he never lost his title, he's coming back to claim it. That's sort of what happened with Dominic Cruz. Now, granted, he had the Mizugaki fight before he went back and fought Dillashaw, but again, there was some sense in that. That was his weight class. He's coming back to take the title in his weight class. You can sell that more. The fans will probably be annoyed by it because there are worthy contenders, but again, it's one thing to be screwing just Damian Maia. It's another thing to be screwing Jacare, Romero, Gegard Mousasi, and potentially some of the other guys up at 85. Again, it doesn't make sense. There's no real long-term play in this. This isn't the best move for business. This isn't the best move for fans. If you're a hardcore fan and you wanted to see, if you want to know who the best middleweight fighter in the world is, and you're going to watch this fight, you really feel like you're being cheated. When Bisping and GSP fight, the winner raises his arm, has his arm raised, and the belt is wrapped around his waist. I'm not going to feel like I'm looking at the best middleweight fighter in the world, let alone in the UFC. And that's not good. That's not what you want as a fight promotion. When you claim you're as real as it gets, when you're the top promotion in the world, it's okay to sometimes go for the money fights, but your champion should be the best. Your champion should be the guys who deserve it. And quite frankly, yes, Michael Bisping is 1-1 with Luke Rockhold, and that one that he did win was most recently when Rockhold was the champion. But for his next two fights to be against Dan Henderson, who is ranked outside of the top 10, and then George St. Pierre, who is not even ranked at middleweight and hasn't fought at middleweight, it does not make sense. This is a bad sport fight. It's a bad business fight. As a fan, I mean, look, I'd love to say I'm not going to watch it. I kind of wish I wouldn't, but I'm interested. I'm interested in just about every fight, and I'm sure once this card gets built, there are going to be some other fights on the card that I'm going to want to see anyway, but this isn't what I like. This isn't something I want to see happen again. I don't wish injury on anybody, but if this fight fell through for whatever reason, I would not be upset at all. Hopefully the UFC, if they aren't fortunate, I would say fortunate enough to have this fight fall through, and this fight does go through, just hopefully whoever wins gets out quickly. They can do an actual middleweight title fight by then, and then a deserving challenger, be it Mousasi, be it maybe if Weidman defeats Mousasi impressively, Yoel Romero, Jacare Souza. One of those guys gets a shot at the winner of this fight, and then the winner of this fight gets a chance to prove, hey, actually, we were better than these guys, or they don't, and then you've got a champion that the fans can at least feel is the best guy at middleweight. And that's really something that middleweight is beginning to look like it's missing right now, and that's not something that's good for the company. It's not good for the sport, and I hope that this gets fixed very soon.